ladies, oh, you gentlemen. Hey, fellas. The divisional round, and it's that one dude, and we finally get out of these janky 3-game slates that we got last week. That one dude made its ravishing return last week, and it was a lovely time. That one dude, James Conner, seems like it has never not gone right this year, right? Ends up putting up basically 20 fantasy points for us last week in a game where his team gets down by 28. What a miracle that was for us. Thank you, Mr. James Conner. But now we get that one dude with a 4-game slate. We don't have to worry about it just being split up into 2 3-game slates. So welcome in that one dude if you are not familiar. I'm sure a lot of people will be seeing this because a lot of people, your fantasy leagues are over. They've been over for a couple weeks. You still got that itch to play some fantasy, and you're like, oh shit, I remember about DFS, or hey, I just learned about DFS. I'm the guy that you need for DFS to smack you around with the information, all free right here for you on this YouTube channel. The That One Dude video is not the video for who do I like the most this week, like what is the in-depth breakdown of the slate. We put one of those out on Wednesday, and early initial thoughts on some research, and then we're going to be putting one out on Friday, so depending on when you're watching this, it might already be out. This one is to try and find those guys in tournaments that are lesser talked about, lower owned relative to the slate. Why do you want that? Well, if a guy is only going to be coming in at 10% and he outscores a guy that's 30% owned, you just jumped 20% or maybe up to 30% of the field if nobody had that guy in those lineups. So that's why it's so important, because taking into account ownership is massively important. If everybody's owned and you get a guy who goes off for 25 fantasy points, but he's 60% owned, it doesn't really help you. You still got to beat 60% of the field. If you get a guy who's 10% owned and goes off for 25 fantasy points, well, bam, you probably just have to beat now 10% of the field based on you having that one guy who hit on a 4-game slate. So that's the goal here, is to find the guys who are going to be lesser talked about, lesser owned, lesser talked about for reasons for matchup, whatever it might be this week. So let's break down into it. Before we do, hit the like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. The whole goal here is to smack you around, give you as much value as possible with this information. I'll be referencing my game-by-game notes, putting up some snapshots on the screen if you're listening on the podcast and you want to come over and see the visuals, some snapshots of game-by-game notes on the stream for these That One Dudes at each position. And I'll be referencing my projections, rankings, ownership over on Patreon as well. You can check all of that out and follow up down below, patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_. And I want to let you know that this video is brought to you. The reason why we're here today, we're all breathing, living this air, watching this video together. You're getting to kick back, relax, max out cool in your car and your headphones, or putting your feet up on your coffee table and relaxing, is because SuperDraft is sponsoring this show. They are a multiplier format. What is a multiplier format? It means that you get a multiplier on how many fantasy points you score, right? Pretty self-explanatory, but for instance, this week's Patrick Mahomes has a 1x multiplier. If he scores 23 fantasy points, you multiply that by 1, he gets 23 SuperDraft points. So we also have guys like Baker Mayfield with a 1.4x multiplier. If he gets 20 fantasy points, you multiply that by 0.4, 40%, he gets some bonus fantasy points as well. He'll start to project out for closer to like 26, 27 fantasy points. So it's all about the projection and understanding how that multiplier is actually going to help you. It's a ton of fun. People are winning left and right. 5 figures. A couple of people have won. I think now 4 people have won 5 figures. One person has won $30,000 on SuperDraft, and in this community, in this Patreon, in the Discord that we have. So check all of that out, link down below if you want a chance to just actually have a better chance at ROI. People do not check SuperDraft or take it as seriously because it's just like the 3rd or 4th site on their list. Their player props, their betting, their Draftkings, their FanDuel all come before that in terms of prioritizing how much time they spend there. So if you're actually starting to prioritize more time on SuperDraft, your ROI is going to be massive. So promo code SAL, you use my name when you sign up, SAL, they will give you a free money bonus up to $1,000. You get that bonus as you play in a slow drip format. So let's start off now with the quarterback position where, look, there's 8 quarterbacks on the slate, and I was coming in here thinking that Baker Mayfield was going to be that one dude. Somebody that, playing from behind against Kansas City. Kansas City's defense is, middle of the pack, especially in the secondary. Yards per play allowed, I believe, 18th this year. So a spot where Baker Mayfield can be efficient. We've seen a couple of spots this season, this year, where Baker Mayfield has had big performances. And I was thinking, okay, Baker Mayfield's going to be the guy. And Baker Mayfield's not highly owned. He's probably going to come in like 12, 10% owned. But then I started looking into it more, ownership projections that we have right now on Patreon. And as of right now, as of today, things can change. But as of Thursday morning, Aaron Rodgers is so criminally under-owned here. I'm currently having Aaron Rodgers in single-digit ownership, and if not, outside of Jared Goff, the lowest owned quarterback on this slate, projecting for 6% ownership. Aaron Rodgers are that one dude this week. Aaron Rodgers this week is going to have a negative 40% pass blocking advantage, as you can see on the screen right now. That's the worst of the week, and that's the worst he has seen so far this season. That is a concern. Now, he has the number 2 overall pass blocking unit, but he's going to be without his offensive tackle, all-pro, all-star, David Bakhtiari, the highest paid left tackle in NFL history, the best left tackle in the NFL right now, in my opinion. So that is a massive issue. And Aaron Donald, though, on the other side for that, for a positive, a spin zone, Aaron Donald got banged up in the last game. They're saying that he's going to be 50% at best potentially for this game if he even suits up. I would assume that he's going to do everything he possibly can to suit up, but that at least helps you take some pressure if that guy's not 100% out there. Even at 50%, though, he's a motherfucking force. The Rams so far this year rank 2nd in pass rush with a 31% pressure rate that also ranks 2nd overall and 1st in coverage. So yes, the whole reason why Aaron Rodgers is lower owned this week is because you do have guys that I like. If you watch my breakdown video, I like the most this week as of right now, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. But if we're looking for a guy who can score you 30 points, Aaron Rodgers is in that neighborhood. And yes, the matchup is brutal. The matchup is difficult, but I'm not too worried about the matchup as it relates to Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has had difficult matchups this year, and he's been fine. The one matchup where he wasn't was against Tampa Bay, where they absolutely torched him. And that can definitely happen in this matchup, but I'm willing to take the risk at 5% ownership if I play Aaron Rodgers in 12 to 15% of my lineups and 2 to 3 times the field on the MVP from this year, who basically goes out every single week and scores you 24 plus fantasy points. I do like that. The Rams rank number 1 in fantasy points allowed and number 1 in yards allowed, 188 per game to the opposing quarterback. But they're also facing a bunch of slunches, right? They got to face Nick Mullins twice this season, so yeah, that's going to help you out a little bit. They got to face Russell Wilson down the stretch, who've been absolutely terrible and one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL the last 4 weeks of the season, Russell Wilson, but nobody talks about that in the general media because he, for some reason, is loved by everybody. I mean, it makes sense, he's a good quarterback, but you get one half a bad season, literally 6 bad games out of Lamar Jackson, and everybody's coming for Lamar Jackson's head in the media. Nobody wants to go for Russell Wilson's head. Interesting. So for the season, you're seeing Aaron Rodgers doing everything that Aaron Rodgers does. He's been fantastic. I don't have to tell you that he has the second all-time, only behind himself from 2011, passer rating in NFL history. That's why he's going to be the MVP. Leading the league in true passer rating at 130.9, leading the league in normal passer rating. He's third in a clean pocket completion percentage right now. He's first in QBR. You're getting a bunch of air yards. You're getting a bunch of deep passes. Led the league in passing touchdowns with 48. Aaron Rodgers is the MVP this season, and he deserves it. The matchup is going to be the difficult one. Jalen Ramsey one-on-one against Davante Adams. What does that yield? I think it's fine, honestly, for Davante Adams. Obviously, it's not a beautiful matchup. I don't love it, but I think it's fine for him. I think he'd still be able to do his thing. I'm more so worried about MVS on the outside against Darius Williams. I'm more so worried about in the slot Allen Lazard against Troy Hill, which could be a positive advantage for Lazard, but still a difficult one. Can the Packers get involved? Robert Tonyan. Can they get involved? All these other players. Aaron Jones in the passing game. The biggest thing is going to be getting Aaron Jones involved in the passing game in this one. I trust from what Matt LaFleur has been able to do for the first 2 years. I trust his play calling. I trust that they get guys in motion like a Tavon Austin, using guys like that out of the backfield, putting a couple running backs on the field, especially Aaron Jones out wide. I trust that upside for Aaron Rodgers to be able to get this thing going. So yes, Aaron Rodgers are that one dude. By no means is he the number 1 quarterback play this week, but when you factor in the fact that he's going to be single-digit owned on a 4-game slate as the MVP, coming off of a bye week with this offense, Davante Adams as a receiver, Aaron Jones out of the backfield, I think there's upside for Aaron Rodgers to score 25-plus points. And then you factor in that he's cheap, right? He's not $7,500 Aaron Rodgers anymore. He's priced already for the matchup, in my opinion, at $6,900, right? Any lower, you would have to say this is criminally underpriced. If Aaron Rodgers was $6,500, $6,600 this week, I think the ownership would be flipping a lot. So I'm not going to be that price sensitive for $300. Give me Aaron Rodgers or that one dude at the quarterback position, $6,900. And a projected ownership around 6% this week. Next up, we are going to go over to the running back position, and there's a lot of running backs in the slate. I thought Aaron Jones might be that one dude, but his ownership seems to be coming up as the week goes on. A lot of guys are picking up ownership up top, like Devin Singletary, with likely no Zach Moss, obviously the Alvin Kamara's of the world, Cam Akers of the world. We can talk about all those guys, but the guy that I want to be talking about, and we've talked about those guys in other videos, the guy I want to be talking about is a Cleveland Browns running back, and it is not Mr. Nick Chubb, who is actually picking up some ownership. It's going to be right now Kareem Hunt, who is projecting out for close to 10% projected ownership on a 4-game slate. As a 10-point underdog, you would think that Kareem Hunt, the pass catching back, would be the one to see a little bit more usage here. So let's get into Kareem Hunt here as a 10-point underdog. Like we said, the Browns have a positive 35% run blocking advantage this week as they run behind the number 1 run blocking unit in the NFL. The Chiefs rank 21st in run defense and 20th in tackling, so a bottom third of the league run defense that has basically been the worst in the league for the past couple of years. So being bottom third of the league, 21st, is actually a little bit of a bump up for them. The Chiefs rank 19th in overall yards per game, allowing 122, so below average in that metric. So what are you getting out of Kareem Hunt? In the regular season, there were some games where there was no Nick Chubb. You saw 198 carries on the overall season, 8 goal line carries is very interesting to see. You saw him be very efficient, 11 total touchdowns, 13.7 fantasy points per game. And then even more efficiency metrics is that he ranks 7th in evaded tackles. He ranks 7th in yards created overall. A lot of targets out of him, a lot of yards per reception, a very efficient running back. I mean, we remember him from the Chiefs. He was fantastic. What did he do last week in wildcard weekend? 8 carries on the ground, 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he also caught a ball for 13 yards. So not the most insane usage out of Kareem Hunt last week, but you have to keep in mind, they were up by 28 early on in this game, right? Like pretty quickly. So it quickly became the Nick Chubb show. Nick Chubb ran 18 times in that game to Kareem Hunt's 8 times. So at the very worst, you're getting Kareem Hunt probably touching the ball in this game against Kansas City 10 times. And at the very best, if they do indeed get down by a score or two late in the game, especially the second half, Kareem Hunt starts to actually see some more routes run. Last week, Kareem Hunt only ran 10 routes and caught his only target for 13 yards. Nick Chubb ran 17 routes, caught all 4 of his targets for 69 yards. Why is that also important? And what do I want to take away from that? Well, I just want to take away from that when you're up by 3 or 4 scores early on in the first quarter, that yes, your main running back who carries the ball on the ground on first and second down is going to be on on the field more. So when you go for play action or when he's just on the field and you're looking at checkdowns, Nick Chubb is going to naturally run more routes because he's on the field more. The game flow is selecting him to be on the field. But if you want to look at any other situation where they're not up by motherfucking 4 scores, the record in a playoff game, 28-0 in the first quarter, yes, just look at week 17 when they faced Pittsburgh, a win to get into the playoffs. You had Kareem Hunt running 20 routes to Nick Chubb only running 9 routes. Most weeks you're going to be seeing, unless it's a blowout, right, like the Tennessee game earlier on this season, most games you're going to be seeing this Cleveland Browns team having a lot of routes run 20 plus from Mr. Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt so far this season, he closed out the season with 20, 25, 13, and 21 routes run. So if you could project somewhere around 20 routes run, more times than not, you're going to be seeing probably around 3 receptions, right? In week 17, he had 1 reception, but then the previous 4 weeks, 3 receptions, 6 receptions, and 3 receptions. If you were setting yourself up for a pretty decent projection of like 5 or 6 fantasy points in the receiving game alone, not factoring in touchdowns, not factoring in you actually getting down by multiple scores, and like they were in week 14 against Baltimore, you seeing in Kareem Hunt 6 receptions on 7 targets, he goes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, but just seeing in general more overall receptions. Like if they get down big in this one and you get a 5-catch, 40-yard game out of Kareem Hunt on the air alone, 9 fantasy points at his price point, at his ownership in the receiving game alone, that is beautiful to see. So yes, I think Kareem Hunt at this ownership number, at this price point is very good. It's very nice to see. The usage that you're going to be getting, the good player that he is, it's not like you're just walking yourself into receptions and that's it. It's not like this is Jalen Richard. This is a guy who picks up yards after contact. He gets goal line carries and red zone work like you saw last week, and he scores on those, and he also breaks tackles like he did on his touchdown last week. 7th in the NFL in the regular season, again, in evaded tackles. So Kareem Hunt, as you can see, as I have it linked down below on Patreon, you can see all the projections for every player, ownership rankings, all that stuff. I'm as a B right now in GPPs, a C plus in cash because I still want projected all the way points to get there more likely. Cash is trying to bank on this lower ownership, but we have him for 10.8 points, a 2.25x value ranking overall. He basically ranks out pretty close to guys like Ronald Jones for me right now, ahead of guys like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Leonard Fournette. So I would be choosing Kareem Hunt if it's going to be lower ownership than Ronald Jones and a GBP at this point. Now we move over to the wide receiver position this week, and there's a couple of guys. We're going to be having a punt play as well. We usually do, so our punt play will be at the wide receiver position. But to just touch on the wide receiver position right now, we're going to be going over back to that Packers game, but not on the Packers side of the ball, on the opposite side of the ball, where a man who got hurt last week in Mr. Cooper Kupp with a knee injury, they say he is questionable this week with that knee injury. He's going to be our that one due to the wide receiver position, Mr. Cooper, my little Kupp. I currently have Cooper Kupp projected out for somewhere around like 12 to 14% ownership. You might be saying, Sal, that's not low ownership. No, on a 4-game slate, that is low ownership. Most wide receivers this week are going to be coming in at 20 to 30% owned. So Cooper Kupp pushing 12, right around there, 12% owned, is going to be definitely lower owned. And he got hurt last week and he came out of the game, but he was putting up in the first half like 80 yards, 80 plus yards, most of it with John Wolford. Cooper Kupp is somebody who's going to be massively underrated this week. Cooper Kupp will likely see Chandon Sullivan in the slot, which is a positive 24% matchup for Mr. Cooper Kupp this year. And the regular season, he ran the 11th most overall routes out of the slot, 27th most overall routes in general. So last year, this was a guy who was top 5 in those routes run. They started throwing a little bit less this year as they ran the ball a lot more. But Cooper Kupp still highly involved just in terms of a yards per route run standpoint, a routes run in general. Yet again, for the second straight year, he's going to be finishing top 10 and really top 5, borderline top 5 in yards after the catch. He's finishing 3rd this year with 507. And last year, he had 9 targets. Love the volume. Just 4 catches for 78 yards. Got hurt later on in that game. You're still seeing a lot of red zone usage. You're still seeing a lot of PPR upside. He finished 9th in the regular season with 92 overall receptions. So I like to see all this stuff out of Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp this week, the matchup against Chandon Sullivan is important because that's a matchup out of the slot. The Packers will have Jair Alexander on the outside, probably taking away Robert Woods. There's not going to be a lot of time to throw downfield for Mr. Jared Goff, who does not have a great offensive line versus defensive line matchup this weekend. In terms of a time to throw, it's going to be less than average, so you're going to have less time downfield to find plays. So Cooper Kupp, like he was last week a lot of times, just missing these 5-yard throws, Jared Goff, just turning around 5-yard, 6-yard slant, get those and get your yards after the catch for Cooper Kupp. I like Cooper Kupp because he's going to be low roam and he has a massive ceiling. In a game where they are 7-point underdogs playing from behind, I think Jared Goff in this game throws for 40 plus times, and if the normal 23.7% target share that led to 8.3 targets per game holds up for Cooper Kupp, the amount that this guy can do after the catch, his overall yards per reception and yards per target is pretty decent for a slot wide receiver. It just means that you're going to be getting a high catch rate, right? Like 7.8 yards per target, ranked 70th in the NFL. He's not being targeted downfield, but we know that. We understand that. So that's going to usually lead to a high true catch rate, a high overall catch rate, and right now he's top 20 in catch rate in the NFL. So if you're getting targets, if you're converting on those targets, and you're getting yards after the catch, and you're also getting those red zone targets, 13 so far this season, ranks 24th in the NFL. He has 8 red zone receptions, which is also top 25 in the NFL. Cooper Kupp is a guy for me. If I pull up my projections right now, Cooper Kupp, again, coming in with pretty low ownership. I currently have Cooper Kupp projected out for 14.5 fantasy points. Cooper Kupp is my number 3 wide receiver play this week, according to my projections. My number 3, basically my number 3 when you factor in fantasy points per dollar. He's only behind a couple of guys that you can see on Patreon down below, and he's not going to be picking up ownership. So I like Cooper Kupp a lot this week. I have him as a B plus currently in cash and a B plus in GPPs. Cooper Kupp is our that one due to the wide receiver position. position this week at $5,300, projecting out for 14.5 fantasy points, 20.3 super draft points, and as of right now, low ownership around 12%. Next up is the tight end position, and there's a couple things I want to say about the tight end position. One, fucking play Travis Kelce, right? Just fucking play Travis Kelce. But two, if you don't, just play Austin Hooper. Just play Austin Hooper, right? Punt on the opposite side of that, bring back in those stacks. So those are the two guys that I'll be trying to play this week. But they're picking up ownership, right? Travis Kelce is going to be by far the highest. I think that you probably see Austin Hooper rivaling Mark Andrews as the second highest owned. So I want to try and get somewhere where people aren't going to be. And let's talk about Mr. Rob Gronkowski here in the divisional round with this quarterback for these days since he's gotten into league, and Mr. Tom Brady. So Rob Gronkowski, if you look at last week, you're not going to like what you saw. Rob Gronkowski ran 18 routes, the third fewest on the team. Only Keyshawn Vaughn and Scotty Miller ran less routes. He ran less routes than Cameron Brate, the quote-unquote backup tight end. He ran 18 routes, saw one target, no receptions. Cameron Brate in that game, 22 routes, caught 4 of 6 targets for 80 yards, and probably should have had a touchdown in that game as well if he didn't have a drop pass. So that is your concern. That is why Rob Gronkowski I currently have coming in around 5% projected ownership, because last week people just saw him blocking. People just saw him not going out, being that the Rob Gronkowski that he was for the first half of the season. But I'm going to be saying, okay, if everybody's just going to assume that he's only going to run 15 routes, that Cameron Brate is now the number one tight end on this team, and that Rob Gronkowski doesn't have all the upside in the world in the red zone for this team in a playoff game with Tom Brady, somebody that he trusts probably the most on this team, then okay, I'm fine to just go right back to Rob Gronkowski. Especially when you see reports towards the end of the season that they're trying to shelf Rob Gronkowski for the playoffs, right? So in Rob Gronkowski in the middle of the season, he's running 24, 32, 28, 25, 26 routes. To close out the season, just 14 routes. Then he gets 29 against Atlanta, has a big game. And then in week 16, 14 routes. But don't let people kind of confuse you there. That entire offense basically sat, all the veterans, right? Tom Brady didn't come out in the second half against Detroit. And in the first half, Gronk had 2 catches on 2 targets, 58 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then in week 17, a game that really doesn't matter for them against Atlanta, he only runs 14 routes. So you're getting 29 routes in week 15, a bunch of 20s, 26, 28, 24 in weeks 10 through week 12. And then you're basically getting 1 week in there in week 14 when he only runs 14 routes in that game, plays 75% of the snaps, right? Week 16, he only plays 45% of the snaps because it's a blowout and he comes out. Week 17, 70% of the snaps because they don't need him at that point in the game against Atlanta. And they were pretty easily winning that game. So I think there's a narrative being driven here that Rob Gronkowski is just blocking and only running 14 or 15 routes. And I think that there's a decent chance that that actually happens, but not enough for me to just go, okay, I want to be playing Rob Gronkowski in just 4% of my lineup. So just matching the field here. I think that Rob Gronkowski is not as good of a play as other tight ends on this slate, like probably a Bob Tonyan, like definitely guys like Mark Andrews and Austin Hooper and Travis Kelce's. But I think that the amount of times that he actually scores 2 touchdowns is right up there with all those guys. And if his ownership is only going to be coming in at 4 or 5%, that is a mistake in my opinion. His matchup against Demario Davis is a positive 37% advantage, so that is good to see. What you're getting out of Rob Gronkowski so far this season at the tight end position is number 1 in deep targets during the regular season with 17. That's upside, right? Number 7 in red zone targets. That's upside. And number 2 in yards per reception. Love to see all that stuff. 3rd in average target distance and 10th in yards after the catch. Gronk's 7 touchdowns, ranked 6th overall this season, so lots of upside for Gronk. If he just runs 24 routes, 25 routes this week, you're probably going to fall your way into a couple of targets and red zone targets. 4 or 5 targets, 4 or 5 receptions. You're playing for the touchdowns here. That's what you're playing for at low ownership. Touchdown upside out of Gronk, who has that 2 touchdown upside that we have already seen not only this year, but obviously so many times in the past. Now, I'm not going to try and fool you. Again, I would rather play Austin Hooper in the same price range. That's why everybody's going over to Austin Hooper with probably close to 20% projected ownership, and nobody really wants to play Gronk. I only have Gronk projected for 7.1 fantasy points, but I have him as a B in GPPs because of this low ownership, a B minus in cash. Again, other guys that you can see down below are better than this projection. But even with that all being said, he's basically right around 4th in the projections. There's a bunch of guys right around his projection for 4th in tight ends. So obviously you know to play Kelce. You now know to probably play Mark Andrews and guys like Austin Hooper, and maybe even a guy like Robert Tonyan for tough matchups for those wide receivers in Green Bay ahead of Rob Gronkowski. But if Gronk is going to be this low owned with 2 touchdown upside and still being probably the biggest safety net for Tom Brady in the red zone on this Tampa Bay offense, I'm fine to be getting there in a positive 37% matchup against Demario Davis. Rob Gronkowski at the cheap price point of $3,600 is going to be our that one dude at the tight end position. And now as we close out the slate, let us discuss our punt play for the day, a $3,900 wide receiver who has a lot of upside and has been seeing a lot more usage, and you get to pair him up if you want to. You probably should with Patrick Mahomes, and that is going to be Mr. Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman finished the season off being a lot more used than DeMarcus Robinson. The last 3 weeks are very telling. Now, in week 17, the starters didn't really play, so we can just look at week 15 and 16, but it's at least worth mentioning for week 17, his routes run, because the usage has been ramped up. So just to give you some perspective, in week 11 through week 14, he ran 12 routes, 16 routes, 13 routes, and 13 routes. He was seeing like 3 targets a week, nothing crazy. Then in week 15, there were some reports that they want to get him more involved, ramp him up for the playoffs because he's a motherfucking weapon, and you should. Week 15, against the Saints, he goes out, he runs 23 routes, catches 3 balls, a touchdown on 9 targets. He tied a season high with 9 targets that he saw also back in week 8 when he ran 31 routes and some guys were injured. Then he comes out and he doubles down. In week 16, he runs even more routes, 26 routes run, the 3rd most that he's seen so far this season. He catches 3 of 6 targets, so 15 targets in back-to-back weeks. And then in week 17, where none of the starters really play, he plays 65% of the snaps. He runs 22 routes. So very interesting to see. Also important to know, he only played played 32% of the snaps, but still the routes runner what matters there. So it's interesting. He's kind of coming up in this snap count. He's taking on more of the role as the wide receiver, I would say 3 behind Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins, ahead of right now DeMarcus Robinson, and he's only $3,900. And he has all the upside in the world downfield, right? This is a guy who right now is going to be leading last year the NFL when it came to yards per reception. He has 4 total touchdowns this year. You're getting a lot of separation for him as well. You're still seeing yards per receptions downfield, but you're also adding in these shorter passes, which increases PPR upside. So McCole Hardman, just because out of all these punt options, right, you have Josh Reynolds pairing with Jared Goff. That doesn't feel that great, right? You have some other punt options that maybe you want to get to down here, but none of them look great. Guys like Miles Boykin and Dez Bryant. DeMarcus Robinson is more expensive somehow than what you're getting out of McCole Hardman. MVS in a tough matchup, and he barely catches the ball himself against Darius Williams. So I like the idea of going to McCole Hardman. If he's going to see 20 overall routes run, even if it's just 20, and he sees 3 to 5 targets, and really it's probably closer to 4 to 5 targets in this game, I like that upside at the cheap price point with Patrick Mahomes. It makes it easier to stack him up with a Tyreek Hill and or a Travis Kelce if you want to go with Patrick Mahomes, who's also expensive. So yes, McCole Hardman is our that one dude at the wide receiver position. As you can see on the screen right now, I have him projected for about 8 fantasy points. I don't have him as anything of a crazy note. He's not playing a full-time role right now, so I have him as a C in cash, but a C plus in GPPs and very close to a B minus for me in GPPs because he's going to be low owned, he's going to be cheap, and he has all the upside in the world. Just the limited opportunities are what you might get here, but the fact that they're coming up over the last 3 weeks of the regular season, I like that a lot. McCole Hardman is our that one dude at the punt position, this week being wide receiver. Thank you so much for tuning into the that one dude for the divisional round. We'll have one for the championship Sunday, and then fuck it, we'll do one for the Super Bowl as well because why not? Thank you so much. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button before you go. Check out Patreon to get the rest of every other player on the slate at every single positions, projections, rankings, ownership, all that type of stuff. Other sports as well. You have PGA, you have NBA right now, tools over there as well. Likely going to be adding the MMA next week, so I appreciate you all in advance for being here. Support the sponsor of the show, Super Draft. What is to be coming? Well, depending on when you're watching this, we might already have out. This is going to be released on a Thursday. We might already have out the Friday final thoughts video for this slate, so be sure to check that out. We have a lot of NBA projections on Patreon and some other stuff, and then next week we'll be doing some more PGA content on the channel and some more NBA content. So thank you so much. I appreciate you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one.